everybody, it's Romania Black, and you know why I am excited? First of all, because it's episode 3 of season 2 of the Apothecary Diaries. But the other thing is because, fingers crossed, my internet is back. Oh, it's been like 2 weeks and it's finally back. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed that it stays on. We're going to hope that that's the case. But I've been gone with my team this weekend to a tournament. And so I just got home this evening and I was like, you know what? I want to watch episode 3 because it's been out for a little bit and I need to watch it for Patreon this week, as well as for all of you who are going to see it on YouTube the following week. But yeah, so far, lots of things are being set up with everything. I do have some comments that I want to talk about as we dive into this. Mariage 1670 with episode 1 says there's a funny scene that was cut out after Island says that she would like to share the book with others, the book being of all the sexual positions. In the book, it says, MaoMao thought she understood what Island was getting at. When you find something interesting, you want to share it. That's human nature. MaoMao, for example, had once discovered a very rare snake she'd never seen before and had gone around showing it to everyone else she could find, and they had not been pleased. So we talked in the comment about MaoMao being like a snake girl, which is really, really funny. And all I could think of was her like trying not to point out sausages and other things for Jinshi. So I can't imagine her being like, hey, want to hold this snake? Jinshi, who's not a eunuch, your mind could go in the gutter with lots of things in this series. So, with episode 1 as well, Rhett the Best says that MaoMao states she isn't a big fan of children, but doesn't mind taking care of the princess, which is, you know, Gyokyo's daughter and Jinshi's half-sister, because it's better than taking care of the girls that are sold into the brothel, because there's nothing more insufferable than a preteen girl. That's the most old lady saying ever. MaoMao sounds like a middle-aged woman, like, these kids, I tell you, these preteens, but that's really sweet. That's really cute. And then when Jinshi put the cat on his face, MaoMao was worried in the novel that someone would look inside and see him undignified. Apparently, it's not uncommon for women to crowd around the windows to watch Jinshi. Figures. That adds another context to the scene. And then when Gao Shun saw Jinshi with the cat, he had a jealous expression. I love Gao Shun, our daddy of the season, being into cats. I'm like, it seems fitting, but the whole cat scene in episode 2 was just, in episode 1, and then the Jinshi and MaoMao moments so far leading up through episode 2 have been really interesting. So, Anime Annie says with episode 2, this part was, well, good to note, that Gao Shun had stated concubine Jin was of middle rank. So far, the only concubine we've had any focus on outside of the top 4 was Fuyo in episode 2 of season 1. So it is interesting to see how some of the concubines that are not in the top 4 are kind of falling to the wayside or having things happen to them, which is terrifying. And then this was interesting to note. So I want to go ahead and apologize to, I think it was Pineapple on YouTube, because Pineapple was like, well, Lady Shin probably reacted to MaoMao sniffing because it was weird. And I was like, well, Lady Shin has seen MaoMao in there before, like in season 1 when she was helping Lihua. But Anime Annie says that Lady Shin back in episode 1 is not only the one that threw away the note that MaoMao left regarding the face powder, which is red flag number 1, going back to my theory in episode 2, go back to that discussion and see that. But she doesn't appear at all during MaoMao's time caring for Consort Lihua at the Emperor's behest. Now, technically, we could say that I apologize because it doesn't seem like she was there. But I mean, she's the main handmaiden. Why wouldn't she have been there? Even if they didn't show her, she's like Hongmian, and Hongmian's always at Lihua's side. I find it kind of hard to believe that she wasn't there while MaoMao was there, unless she was doing things behind the scenes, and that's going to be talked about in this season. So we'll see with that. And kind of going along with that, before we start real quick, I told my moderators I want to be very, very careful, because as it's happening a lot on my channel, and I will probably talk about it in the February update video, there are a lot of people trying to like deconfirm theories that I'm making, or they try to confirm them, or they're trying to add their own theory, but they're not telling me that they're adding their own theory. They're just stating it like it's a fact. And it really does bother me a little bit, because I ask rhetorical questions in my discussion because they are rhetorical. And Be Happy kind of talked about this in our Discord. But, you know, if I want to know what's actually happening, I would go look it up. If I really wanted to know the answer and I didn't want to wait on the show to tell me, I would stop during the discussion, get on the internet and look up the answer and talk about it with you all. But I don't want to do that. I want to go in blind. And I want the show. One of the things I love about Apothecary Diaries is it is a mystery. It is a puzzle. I want to try to figure it out. And if I don't know the answer right now, I want the show to give me the answer. And I feel like I talk about that with every one of my shows, but I feel like I need to reiterate it just with some of the comments that the mods are like, spoiler, 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 don't read, don't read, don't read. And I feel like I want to read your comments, but they just can't have spoilers. So with that, theories are fun, but confirming or deconfirming theories, especially for a reactor, not so much. So please let me have my fun, racking my brain, trying to find answers. I really like doing that. And it is 101 at this point with all of my shows, but, you know, spoiler tag in the comments. So if you're like, hey, this is something that is talked about that the show's going to tell later, just spoiler tag it so I don't read it. Because I had a comment show up in my inbox and it was linked with another comment for another series, which Patreon sometimes does that in my inbox for my comments. And I'm like, And so when I went to click on to actually look at the comment for the other series, that one popped up. And there were no spoiler tags. There were no, hey, this is my theory. It just said, oh, well, it said the Emperor got mad because they mistook a servant for Lolan. And I bet this is that servant. And I was like, did I just waste all of my time theorizing that Lolan is Shisui when that's not the case and this was a spoiler? It came out, the person was like, oh no, this is just my theory. And I'm like, why couldn't you say this is my theory to make me think that? But I've already talked it over with them and it's fine. But then other people in the Discord were like, wait, it's not Lolan? And I was like, and then they said they were joking. And I was like, okay, well, you got to work with me. So I want to be able to talk about these theories and I want to be able to theorize with you all. But if you're going to comment, you please be considerate of it. Please, I'm begging you, because I was so upset because the last thing I want is for the mystery to be ruined. And it was my fault I saw that comment because the mods would have flagged it. They would have been like, don't read that. But it happens sometimes. So please help make my mods job easier. Please help make me to where I can read your comments and engage with you. But if the show is going to tell me, you gotta not tell me until the show gives it away. And if you think that something has come up, but you're not sure, you need to go look that up yourself to make sure that it's not a spoiler. Because I have had that happen in other series. They're like, I think this was talked about, but they didn't actually go do the research. And then it came out that it was or it wasn't. And it's like, if you're going to have me read that comment, you need to take the time to research it yourself to make sure it's accurate. And that's me being a teacher. That's just how I am. So that's my two piece about that before we start the episode. But I want to keep reading your comments, but you have to make sure that I am able to read your comments. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I've talked for nearly 10 minutes, so we need to get into this episode because I'm really, really excited about it, and I've been excited all weekend to see it. So with that being said, we're not going to waste any more time. I got my coffee poured. I'm ready to go. We are going to start the Apothecary Diaries, episode 3. And we are going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's go. Well, it felt nice to have a full one-part episode with no cliffhanger. I've been watching several shows on my channel this past week and this week as well that are like 2-parters or 3-parters or just, they're just not self-contained stories. And I just needed a self-contained story. And we definitely got that this episode, although there's lots of implications, I'm sure, for the season to come that I don't even know about yet. But we'll cross those bridges when we get to it. Something that was crazy about this episode is I'm looking at the OP right now. We had the little pink hair tie that in episode 2 was tied to Xiaolin. And so we knew that that was kind of one. But in this episode, there were 3 images that technically could be tied to this episode. They talked about hairpins, which we see Jinshi's hairpin at the top, but I don't think that represents this episode. There was a little frog that hoppity hippity by that looks like that frog in the OP, but I don't think it's got to do necessarily with it. I don't know. It feels like for it to just show up for that one episode, the episode wasn't really focused on it, so it seems like a red herring. And in this episode, though, the main priority were mushrooms. So I'm pretty sure the hand holding the mushroom is going to be what this episode represents. So we'll see if the hairpin and the frog come back in other episodes as themes. But I definitely think the mushroom one is the theme of this episode. So we can cross that out, right? We can say that that's what this episode is about. But okay. So this episode's interesting. I definitely feel like we talked about this in the comments with Anime Annie and some others, but I kind of like that Jinshi and MaoMao are getting closer, but they're also getting more comfortable around each other. But what I like about it is as you develop a relationship with someone, you have to at some point kind of strip off the veneer of we're just playing like goody two-shoes around each other. Like when you like someone, you have a crush on them, you don't want them to see the worst parts of you because you're afraid that there's a chance that person might reject you, which is a very natural response that most people encounter. You want to look your best around your crush, around someone you care about, you know, when you first meet them. And I feel like season 1, because Jinshi and MaoMao didn't know each other, it was kind of like they were on their best behaviors around each other. And I know that's not entirely the case, but especially for Jinshi, it seemed like it was. Ever since last episode, when Jinshi and MaoMao had that conversation by themselves, it definitely feels like they are more comfortable around each other. But with that comes kind of showing your true self and showing your insecurities and showing when you're not happy with someone and not trying to just please them all the time or stay on their good side all the time. Not to say MaoMao's been doing that, but she has been in a few instances, but I think it's more on Jinshi. But like for here, for example, Jinshi, he just has this look on his face around MaoMao like he's trying to figure out what to say. And I feel like there is a part of Jinshi that worries about MaoMao's well-being and her safety, and he wants to keep her safe. But then the conversation goes back to season 1 where she's like, you're not really in that position to keep me safe. So it kind of feels in some regards like he's trying to keep her away from certain areas, like with the Jade Pavilion, because he doesn't want her getting too involved, because then she could be, you know, she doesn't have a lot of defense other than lock-in, but so I feel like there's that he's trying to take into consideration. And also he's being more comfortable around her, which means he can show a little bit more of objections when he's worried about her hurting herself. And MaoMao does not care if she hurts herself. And I do love because, and like I said, I've compared this series a lot to Heaven Official's Blessing because Jinshi and MaoMao are, the author MXTX might as well have wrote these characters. They feel like MXTX characters. But in that series, there is a character who practices a lot of self-harm, and they don't really care what happens to themselves because they don't think very highly of themselves, even though everybody else around them does. And so the love interest in that series is kind of like, you need to start taking better care of yourself. And they kind of take it upon themselves in certain ways to try and help that character to not hurt themselves or be comfortable hurting themselves. That's the main thing, to be comfortable hurting themselves. They're like, that's not good. And so Jinshi kind of seems to take this upon himself in this episode by, especially with the mushrooms at the end, but by kind of being like, I don't want you in a position of danger. So here, go off and do this one thing. And then it actually ends up solving the case for them, which is interesting in itself. But then we finally got her taking off that bandage and showing Jinshi what's up. And so, I'm so glad that's out in the open. I'm so glad. That was bugging me all last season. It was bugging me that she wouldn't show him that bandaged arm and that he never asked about it. And then that's kind of going along with this theme of, as they get to know each other, they're kind of, you know, for lack of better words, they're peeling back the layers and revealing more and more to each other. And that's what you do when you're in a relationship with someone. You peel back those layers. Now, obviously, do I think that Jinshi and MaoMao are going to be romantic in this season? No, I don't think they are. They've got so long to go. But what I like that we're already seeing with Jinshi and MaoMao is kind of like, first was us getting to know each other in season 1. Now it's now we need to get to know each other like on a bigger level. I'm really excited to see where it goes. Do I think anything like mushy gushy romantic is gonna happen with MaoMao? No, I don't think so. But I think there's gonna be a lot. I'm fascinated by more moments like this, like in last episode, more moments with the two of them by themselves, talking, theorizing, getting to know one another. I love that. I think that's really good. So yeah, so concubine Jin, it was food poisoning that killed her. And Gyokyo's like, she's been bedridden for a year. Well, all of it coming out was insane. Like, it was just like, boom, revelation. That no, well, she's not been bedridden for a year. She's been imitated by somebody else for a year. So there we go. Insane. I love Gyokyo getting excited whenever Jinshi comes in. So the episode's called Corpse Fungus. As soon as they said corpse fungus, I was like, oh, interesting. But MaoMao sees Xiaolin teaching the other girls how to write, and she's really excited, and she's like, I'll just let her concentrate and it'll be fine. So a court lady is missing, her name Tao. What's interesting is this makes a lot of sense because, you know, there's 2,000 women in the rear palace. So one concubine, especially if they're low ranking, going missing, wouldn't be that unimaginable and would make a lot of sense, unfortunately, because there's not someone keeping tabs on all of them, and the emperor's not seeing all of them as well, just seeing a select few. And so the fact that Tao only really went missing when the person she was going to get married to started being like, hey, where are you? That's honestly terrifying, if I'm being real. The fact that she went a year impersonating someone else, no one kept tabs on her, no one kept tabs on what she was doing. It was only when her husband-to-be finally came looking for her that they figured out she was dead. That's so scary, right? And it really does illustrate, I think, what MaoMao knows from the brothel. That's kind of paralleled here as well. Her tenure was almost up and she was scheduled to get married soon. She was given a hairpin at the garden party. It's crazy, like a year ago, from an up-and-coming bureaucrat. The matron wanted her to stay, though. I think MaoMao, she's kind of curious about this whole thing. I don't think MaoMao has any interest in marriage, so she's just kind of like, well, that's no business of mine. But I think it does, kind of perk MaoMao's ears up when she sees about, this potential mystery of someone going missing, and then the whole thing with the body. I mean, you might as well just hand MaoMao some candy because that's exactly what she likes. Also, good to see the cat. That cat being ridiculous. I love MaoMao just ignores her completely. And they're like, we don't know where she went. This type of thing isn't unheard of. A lot of women here have interpersonal concerns. And that's the thing, too, is it's kind of like, I'm sure MaoMao's used to it in the brothel or in the red light district culture to some effect, but because these women are in this position that doesn't grant them a lot of power, it is all too easy for them to disappear, which is very scary. So, yeah, they set this up really good in this episode. I really liked it. And she's like, this is the rear palace, a flower garden packed with 2,000 women. Easy to get lost. So then we have to make public appearances, an outdoor tea party, so Gokyo can be seen in public, But I like that MaoMao notes, even though the intent of it is to make it seem like everything's fine, that she suspects that some people are probably catching on to the fact that she's probably pregnant. But the question is, when she said that, the people who have found out, are they going to react to it in a good way or a bad way? And that's kind of, she talked about Jingli with that as well in the past. Do they have good intentions or bad intentions? Now, Gyokyo is a pot stirrer. Girl is a pot stirrer. She knows that Jinshi likes MaoMao. She knows it. I think she's also aware that MaoMao has some eccentricities that are not going to lend her to be as romantic with Jinshi. But MaoMao, Gyokyo is ever the amazing mother-in-law or stepmother in this case. And I'm sure she's like, oh, hey, Jinshi, look, it's MaoMao. When Jinshi looked over and saw her and was really cold in his expression, that's not a look we've seen from Jinshi when MaoMao's around. And it kind of unsettled me a little bit because I feel like MaoMao I'm like, does he think that MaoMao doesn't like him? Is that what he thinks? Is he really pouting? Because he's usually like all like, oh, hey, MaoMao, let me tease you. And he's not doing that anymore. So I don't know if he is concerned that MaoMao doesn't have good thoughts about him and he's sulking about it, or if he's concerned about her well-being and it's frustrating him, or if he's frustrated because he can't tell her that he likes her because, of his position. I feel like Jinshi's just kind of in a rut right now, and I feel bad for him. So yeah. So she comes there and they're like, oh, Jinshi wants to help you. And Jinshi asks her to go with them, and she's like, well, why can't we talk in front of Gyokyo? And he's like, oh, well, I don't want to spend too much time with the Emperor's beloved concubine. He's like, I don't want my father/brother or my brother/father to know that I'm spending all this time with you. I don't think the Emperor would be jealous of Jinshi, honestly. I would like to imagine the Emperor knows that Jinshi is not really interested in these women. He's kind of opposite of his brother dad. But I think that the real reason, as we find out in the episode, is because Jinshi wants to not only talk. I think the school's not the problem. Gyokyo would be fine knowing about the school, but it's literally concubine Jin that he doesn't want her privy to. And he knew he was going to have to tell MaoMao about that part of the situation. So he's like, let's just get out of here and, I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. Also, I really feel for whenever Jingli starts to cry and Gyokyo's like, boo. I feel like that's every friend that I know that has a kid, and their kids, like, of course, take priority. And so they're like, I gotta go take care of the kids, so it's fine. Meanwhile, Jinshi and MaoMao are out here living their single life, to the fullest. I feel like it felt very relatable to some friends that I have in that moment. So Jinshi talks about the novels, which we've already talked about in episode 1. But the big thing is he wants to start taking it a step further, creating basically a penmanship school. So Jinshi's like, he is getting this on a roll. He's like, hey, we're getting these girls reading. Let's start a calligraphy school. Let's get them writing. Let's put my plan that MaoMao has had conjecture about of what Jinshi was doing. He's like, let's put this in motion. And the thing about it is MaoMao kind of reads him where I don't think she means to read him as hard as she does, but she's kind of like, oh yeah, he thinks up these ideas, but he doesn't think them all the way through. And I was like, girl, read him to filth. But she does bring up a good point that where he wants the school originally is going to not only be at this center of a lot of foot traffic, but also where a lot of high-ranking concubines could see them and get jealous because, as we see with concubine Jin, if they get jealous that their prospects aren't going to be, aren't going to measure up for the Emperor, then they're going to probably want to hurt that concubine that they feel jealous for. So I think MaoMao does a really good thing saying, how about we take it to, here's this abandoned area that nobody's messing with and it needs renovation anyway. Why don't we put it there? Because that's a space that needs to be used for something anyway. And now wasn't Aduo, didn't she go? She went outside the rear palace to like the north somewhere, didn't she? I think so. MaoMao's smiling and being excited because Jinshi's thought up this plan and he's putting into motion, and she smiles. She's like, oh, that's a good idea. And Gaoshun and Jinshi are like, why are you smiling? Why are you happy? I'm like, guys, be happy for MaoMao. You should embrace this. Embrace MaoMao being in a good mood. But poor Gaoshun looks so shocked. He's like, where's your stare? And then Gaoshun's like, are you unwell? And she's like, can I not smile and be happy? I feel like MaoMao, since she's come back to the rear palace, hanging out with Xiaolan and being around the others and being more comfortable, I feel like it's caused her to kind of drop her guard and lower it and be more congenial, which is not something that Gaoshun and Jinshi are used to. But again, this season is showing us these characters where they're dropping their guard and being more comfortable around one another, and this is something we see from that. He's like, well, it is somewhat unsettling. He doesn't say it's a bad thing. He just says it's unsettling, and he has like, there's a little blush on his cheek too, by the way. There's a sweat drop, but there's a little blush too. And she's like, and then she kind of goes, and he's like, oh yeah, there's the smile. And she's like, you're a masochist, which he is. I fully believe that about him. So then he's like, what do you think about the plan? And she's like, let's take it to the north side and do it that way. It may be convenient, but some concubines like Jin would get prideful and that could cause some problems. And he's like, okay, well, let's build it on the north side. And she's like, let's also call it vocational training. She's like, let's rename it because penmanship school might raise some eyebrows and get people wondering why we're teaching the servant girls to write and what the point of that is. So instead, let's call it vocational training. That's an umbrella term. You can cover a lot of bases with that and then go from there. Girl could write a grant. Girl could work for a school. Girl's got some aptitude for that. I love it. And then Jen, she's like, so that's how it works. And she says, oh, well, an occasional snack might be good too. I love when he says occasional. She's like, yeah, we don't want to reward them all the time. And Jinshi, who's grown up in a castle, like a palace, essentially, where he's been spoiled, probably doesn't know what that means. I love that. I love it. She's like, his head's in the right place, but he doesn't think things through. I know she didn't mean it to be rough, but it just sounded brutal. I was like, girl, probably because of his high-class upbringing. I mean, yeah, I'm sure because of his upbringing, he doesn't think of MaoMao and him work so well together because MaoMao thinks up all of like the gritty underground issues that would come about, and Jinshi has the resources to plan things to make the accommodations happen. So they really work well together because of their different upbringings and how different they look at situations, right? And MaoMao's like, well, he must be asking me because that's why he wants my expertise on that. I don't know if Jinshi's asking MaoMao because he sees the value in it and wants to make her happy and thinks that she sees the value in it as well. He won't come out and just say that. And she's like, well, that's just my opinion, but you know, anything else? And he's like, oh yeah, one more thing. The reason why you're here and not around Gokyo. And that's, how much do you know about mushrooms? And she's like, oh, well, I figured she'd fangirl more, but she's like, where's this going? And he says, yeah, this time of year, some court ladies forage for mushrooms without permission and get food poisoning. He's like, sound like anybody you know? And she's like, me? Take mushrooms? Give them to the doctor? Why would you do? I feel like Jinshi also calls her out because he's like, did you eat these mushrooms without realizing the possibility that you could get poisoned? And MaoMao's like, well, I don't care if I got poisoned. But she's like, I was just thinning out the orchards and gathering the mushrooms. It's perfectly fine. So he's like, well, I want you to find and dispose any that you think might mistakenly get eaten. That's clever of Jinshi because he was hoping she would find the mushroom that caused the one concubine to die. But then he says, I need you to take a break from all the other Jade Pavilion tasks other than tasting. And she's like, well, that sounds like something to explain in front of Lady Gyokyo. But we find out later the reason why he does it in front of her now is because Lady Gyokyo had a relation with Jin and the other concubines. So he doesn't want, and Hongmian did as well. So he doesn't want them knowing about this because it is tied kind of to them as well. And so then she tries to figure out, like, why has he been looking at me this way? Like, why does he keep giving me these looks? And then he's like, I'm counting on you. Like, he says that with a smile. And she's like, okay. She's like, something's going on. But she's like, but this sounds fun. She's like, you know what? I don't know why Jinshi's acting weird around me. I don't know why we're being all hush-hush about this. But you just told me I could go hunt for mushrooms. So we're going to have the time of our lives here. Don't you worry. I thought this was really super cute. So yeah, so she walks around looking. She's like, where should I go? That's when we see that frog hop out. The pine tree, the gardens, the orchard, the pine trees. There's many places mushrooms can grow. And it's prime mushroom season. Girl just needs a truffle finding pig and she will have it. So she skips the places with the south side because that's not where, you know, they're going to be looking for, you know, mushrooms anyway. I love MaoMao finding all these mushrooms. I actually have had a tree grow the mushrooms that are on the side of it like there too. Although I've also had people that are in the timber industry tell me, because I had a tree outside my home that had that mushroom on it. And he was like, yeah, that tree's probably dying. And so that mushroom grows inside of dead trees. And I was like, Which again, furthers when we see all the mushrooms on the ground. The reason why I said that in the reaction was not only because of the tree fungi, which usually grows on the inside of dead trees, meaning they're dying, and which is kind of disturbing in itself, where he's like, well, it's not dead yet, but it's growing this fungus. I'm like, that's terrifying. But also, if you've ever seen, like, when we had a tree cut down at my parents' house, and around the tree stump, there was like what we call a fairy ring, which is like these rings of mushrooms. And it has something to do, I think, with like the decaying of the root systems and everything. I had a tree outside my home kind of cut down a year ago because it was starting to fall over and it had died naturally. And so we had it cut down, and it did the same thing. It grew mushrooms all around the base of it because where it was decomposing. And I was like, that's interesting. So as soon as we saw mushrooms all over there, I was like, ugh, mushrooms that aren't just in like a damp place by itself. I was like, I wonder if there's bodies here, because talk about a smell, which sounds like corpses. Talk about mushrooms growing. The episode's literally called Corpse Fungus. So I was like, all right, we got a dead body, and MaoMao's going to do CSI Miami now. I do think it's interesting that Shisui mentioned the smell. And it felt very much like when Shisui was saying it, it felt very much like, you know, Locken trying to enlist and Suirei trying to enlist MaoMao to figure out things. So that the question is, like, did Shisui intend it for that reason, or did she just casually mention the smell for other reasons? Oh. Anyway, I love they call MaoMao nasty. All I could think of was Christina Aguilera's Dirty song. Ring the alarm. Poor MaoMao. But she finds all of these medicinal mushrooms. MaoMao found a treasure trove. I love she tells the doctor they're all poisonous, so he won't eat any of them. Also, keep them away from little MaoMao cat. We don't need any of that. But yeah. So then they're wearing black strings on their wrists to go pay their respects to concubine Jin. And I wonder if the reason that Hongmian was kind of ominous looking at the end of the last episode was because she'd heard concubine Jin died and knew about her history, and that's probably why she had that reaction. Also because it was connected to Gyokyo and when her and her baby were poisoned previously. So we find out concubine Jin was an upper rank concubine, the daughter of a high ranking official. MaoMao with her hair just straight down looks so weird. I'm used to at least seeing her with buns or something, or a ponytail, something to give it volume. Here her hair has like no volume. It's so crazy. She was sick in her room the last year, all stuck in her room. Well, it wasn't her, it was an imposter. And she got food poisoning and never recovered. It wasn't like the emperor was visiting her. She should have gone home. I feel like Hongmian was saying, like, the emperor wasn't visiting you. You were sick. You should have just left. I feel that ties to, we know from season 1 that Hongmian wanted to go home as well. That she liked this idea of, I'm not saying she wants to go home, but she did talk about like getting married and doing all of this, but that's not in the cards for her. So I feel like Hongmian's like, why didn't you leave? You had this opportunity and now we know why, right? And so Mama was like, you don't usually talk about people like this, so what's up? And then she waits for a second and then tells her and says she was very difficult as a person and very jealous of the other concubines and all the court ladies. She would attack them verbally, even physically, if they were lower class. And that was when Lady Gyokyu was poisoned while she was pregnant with the princess. So she was poisoned and didn't lose the baby, but I like that silence that just hangs over the two of them, like letting that sink in. And so, again, we talk about conjecture and evidence. They suspected that concubine Jin had something to do with it, but when he made an inquiry, here's the thing. When he made the inquiry to the one woman, was this a year ago before the one girl took her place, or was the girl that took her place, was it after this? I don't know. This seems like concubine Jin, but was it really her, or was it the other girl that was posing to be her? Again, that's kind of the thing. It's all conjecture. There is no evidence. So even though she's like, well, do you have any evidence? Well, okay, this has to be her because she is wearing the jewelry. Okay, the jewelry she was buried with, she is wearing it in this point here. So it could be that Jin did poison Gyokyo. But again, we don't know. We have no evidence. And Jin seems like the type of person who, if you said, hey, did you steal this thing? She'd be like, well, how can you prove it? And definitely she may not have done it at all, but she's going to be snide about it and kind of be, a little bit persnickety about it because you're up in her business and, calling her a liar and saying these things that would hurt her pride. And she's like, well, where's your proof? So it would, to us as the audience, seem like she poisoned Gyokyo, but can we say that she did? No, not necessarily. And we learned last season, as with Locken, you can't just say, oh, well, I think that all the evidence points to this. Locken turned out to be totally different. So, we just don't know. That's kind of the way I feel about Shisui and who I believe is Lowland, is that just because we've seen this one aspect of Lowland does not mean that it could not be Shisui as the same person. So we'll see. We'll see about that. We'll see about that where it goes. But clearly she has the necklace and the head piece that the corpse had. So that is her. Okay. She's like, well, it was suspicion. And even her ladies in waiting had a rough time. And MaoMao's like, okay. So MaoMao's like, Jinshi wants me to find out possibly if there's a connection to all of this. I didn't want to talk about it in front of Gyokyo because it's a sensitive subject. So when they go to pay their respects to the corpse and do all of that, I like that MaoMao talks about how Jinshi seems like he's partial to Lady Gyokyo, but he's being pretty respectful throughout. I mean, I think Gyokyo is his favorite, obviously, other than maybe Aduo for reasons. But I feel like he is trying to be as respectful and as, impartial as possible. So we know Lady Gyokyo is not poisoning anybody, so what does that leave? I like that she says that the other lady in waiting, they're too nice. They're too nice to be murderers, which is funny. So the prime suspect, and she's like, oh, he was probing my reaction while fronting it as a request to investigate the mushrooms. I don't think that she's saying that Jinshi thought she was, the one that poisoned anybody. Now, the woman there handing out the lilies, we saw that in the OP with the hand with the lilies, but her holding out the lilies and had the poison in her hands. Obviously, we can assume she's one of the ones that rubbed poison all over the one girl's face and that she has a hand in this. I kept waiting for MaoMao to say something about the servant with the scars on her hands, but she doesn't have any concrete evidence, so she can't say it was her without proof. And I don't think Jinshi believes MaoMao poisoned anybody, but that's why he's having MaoMao on the case to look it up. The moment that we saw those hands and they were blemish free, I thought that seems like something's wrong. Because from seeing Fengshin with the syphilis, eczema, and seeing the maid with the scars on the hand, if it was the mushrooms, you would think it would be on her wrists or arms or something. But her hands were not blemished. So what do we do with that? She's like, at least I'd be able to hear some of the symptoms before she had passed, if only. And that's when the one lady comes in, the one concubine son, and she has the same type of poison all over her as Tao, who's been rubbed with it as well. That's so insane. Saying you got what you deserved. These concubines, what the fudge? Although the idea of this poison is terrifying. I don't like any of this. No. And MaoMao's like, Jinshi was trying to figure out what type of poison, what caused all of this. So yeah, Sun was from a wealthy family and had a great personality. And the Emperor even visited her from time to time. So Sun had been visited by the Emperor, which I don't know. I still, it weirds me out. I know it was the times. I know it was part of what he was supposed to do as Emperor. I know all the historical information. It's just so weird that old Daddy Emperor is out here macking on all these ladies left and right. And Jinshi's over here like, the lady that I like is obsessed with snakes and mushrooms. Oh, it's just so weird. Also, if Jinshi knew that that was his dad going out and doing all that, how bizarre, right? How bizarre. But apparently he visited her in the bedroom from time to time. But 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, her hair started to fall out because she had contact with the mushroom. And we think it was because of Jin poisoning her. Now, I said that earlier in the discussion. What I meant was we find out that the one girl's son was finally... Sun doesn't seem to have known that Jin was replaced by the concubine Tao, which is interesting. So, because otherwise, why would she go in front of the grave and yell at her if she knew it was Tao, right? So this was happening on multiple levels. You had Sun, who was a concubine poisoned by Jin. Then you had Jin over here with her handmaids, and Jin ends up getting killed by the handmaids, but then Tao ends up replacing her, but then she gets poisoned to make it look like she was dying as well, just like Sun. So, and the handmaids could have been hired by Jin to poison Sun, so it's just all kinds of crazy, y'all. These concubines be crazy. I do love the corpse mushroom is terrifying. It looks like something from Stranger Things. It looks like something from The Last of Us. It looks terrifying. No, thank you. I like that she makes everybody cover up and she has her mitts and everything because it's so dangerous. And I love that she keeps Jinshi away. She's like, I don't want you to get hurt. Right? I love that. She's like, and because the one place... It's also an example of things just working out in something's favor. It wasn't like anybody was growing the mushrooms. It's literally because this area was unmaintained, they kind of flourished. And it's just like nature being nature, you know? And she's like, it's quite rare and it's extremely dangerous. Ingesting one piece is lethal and it can cause harm just by touch. And then she's like, I don't want you to, getting closer to it. You'll end up like the concubines, Jin and Sun, like this. And then she shows where the little bit rubbed on her arm. And of course, Jinshi, we don't get to see his whole face, but we see him being like, excuse me, why are you poisoned? And I love whenever Jinshi gets super soft after MaoMao reveals something that's been harmful to her. He gets super soft with her. She's like, I came across this mushroom in the past. And she says, I was foraging for herbs with my dad. And he's like, you touched it? And she's like, yeah, I washed it immediately, but this is the result. And then his eyes get super soft and we can't see his face, but I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's like, are there more scars beneath your bandages? Like he's feeling so sad for her because of, what her upbringing has been like. And she's like, oh, well, actually, these are just experiments I did on myself. And he's like, wait, what experiments? I loved it. She's like, excuse me, I don't believe we were privy to this knowledge. What have you been doing experimenting on yourself? And she's like, oh, it's my hobby. And he's like, what do you mean your hobby? That's not someone's hobby. You shouldn't do that. And she's like, oh yeah, I didn't tell him, did I? And she's like, well, that's not important. And she's like, really? I love Gaoshin beside him. Like, oh my God. Gaoshin's like, you're going to be the death of this man. I hope you realize that. I hope you know that. She's like, yeah. She's like, concubine Jin's body was covered with rashes and she'd lost a lot of hair. She's like, were you looking for where this poison came from? And I like that Gaoshin's like, well, that didn't take her long to figure out, did it? And he's like, oh, you saw through my clever ruse. And I'm like, well, Jinshi. It's like 2 years ago, concubine's son suddenly contracted the mysterious illness, which we know about. The poison was a suspected cause, and the culprit was rumored to be Jin. But we couldn't prove that it was her. But then a year ago, the same symptoms appeared on her as well. But we know it was the other woman posing as her, right? Yep. And that's how she was able to hide out of sight for a year. She was a very proud woman, and she took poison to commit suicide. Now, that's a testimony of the woman that served her anyway. Well, it could be that they poisoned the woman in the end so that she wouldn't say anything. They poisoned Tao to kill her, right? What a juicy murder mystery. And she's like, oh, well, I mean, the mushroom causes stomachache, vomiting, and paralyzing, and it's lethal, but it's, it causes inflammation of the mouth, but none of that seemed on her body, so she's like, well, she's like, it was as if someone rubbed the poisoned mushroom directly on her face. because her hands were clean, which is what the other servant girls probably did. And then she wants to say the inflammation was on the hand of the servant girl, but because she doesn't have the exact evidence, she doesn't want to use conjecture. And then, oh my God, Jinshi grabbing her little bandana and bringing her up to his face and being like, if you have something to say, say it. I feel like that's one of the reasons why Jinshi has been a little bit colder to him, is because Jinshi's like, I want you to trust me and I want you to open up and tell me what you're thinking and don't have me guess. And MaoMao's just not ready to do that yet. But I feel like that's part of it. And she's just like, oh, hello. I was like, MaoMao, are you into this? Are you into him being a little bit rough like this, ma'am? But then she scrunches her face like, no. At first, you're like, oh, is she into this? Because Jinshi is into this. Most definitely, Jinshi is into it. But MaoMao's like, no. Back off. 6 feet, Jinshi, 6 feet. And she's like, can you give me a few days to figure it out? She's like, I need a few eunuchs who can keep a secret and do some physical labor. I love the best part was I was like, oh, physical labor, eunuchs can do that. Fine. These gossipy bitches not say anything? Oh. So, of course, Gaoshun has to be one of them. All I could think about was just every time we've had eunuchs involved, they've been like listening, eavesdropping, being at the most opportune moments. I'm like, okay. I love Jin. She was like, physical labor. So he sends Gaoshun. And Gaoshun's like, yes, I can definitely do this. She's like, I can't say for certain. And he's like, we'll do it anyway. That seems like such a thing for Jinshi to say, where he's like, fine, I'm making you do it anyway. And she's like, well, framing it as an order makes it easier because it puts the onus on Jinshi that if she does this, Jinshi's the one that gets in trouble, not her if something goes wrong. Is essentially what's happening with that. So, when Gaoshun's like, what is she trying to figure out? And I love Jinshi's like, well, I don't know, but when the apothecary is like that, she's looking for one final piece of evidence. I love that Jinshi's like, I don't know what her game is, but I know that look. He's like, I know she's so close to figuring it out. And I know she's on the case. Like, he has such trust and faith in her. And I'm like, ah, oh, Jinshi, I love that about you. I absolutely love it. So she looks around, has Gaoshun and these 2 eunuchs dig around until they find the corpse. And there we go. The evidence. She's like, I didn't think we'd find it this quickly. So it's the body of the concubine. Her accessories were there. The real concubine Jin is buried in the forest, and the imposter took her place. So they're talking about... And the interesting thing is, again, Jinshi and Gaoshun knew nothing about Tao. The doctor knew about her, but Gaoshun and Jinshi did not. Which kind of goes to show just how some of these women fall through the cracks. Because Jinshi's like the head eunuch. Gaoshun is, and he's literally the brother son of the emperor. And Gaoshun's like way up there as well. And neither of them knew this woman. Nor that she was supposed to be married. Anything about her. Or her disappearance. They knew nothing about that. The quack doctor knew. But that just shows you that there is like missing links of the information in the chain. Right? And they're like, she looks a lot like concubine Jin. So, like, apparently even their builds were similar. So they covered up her face so nobody would be able to tell. Except maybe her immediate servants. It wouldn't have been difficult to trick a monthly visitor. And so they're like, was the Tao woman conspiring with concubine Jin's lady-in-waiting? And MaoMao's like, I suspect though, so but I don't know the details. She's like, I can't say that much, but... She's like, I have some personal opinions though. That there was probably jealousy triggered. Jin didn't enjoy the fact that the court lady who looked like her had found love and was getting married. And we see the hairpin she's holding. Although the hairpin she's holding in that shot does not look like the hairpin that is Jinshi's in the opening. So we're going to just avoid that. Ignore that. She couldn't even get a visit from the emperor in her case. And so Tao was probably abused. And then there could have been an argument and... one thing led to another and she accidentally killed old Jin. You know how that goes, that song and dance. And then the servants convinced her, you know, for self-preservation to cover up the death. And she couldn't decline, of course. And then as the marriage talks got increasingly serious, the others got the poison on their hands and put it on her as well. Yep. And so the servant girls killed her. But that's all conjecture. And I like that MaoMao's like, it's not my job to dispense that justice. The higher-ups will figure out, and they can make up whatever motives they want. It's always kind of sad that MaoMao knows how the system works. And she's like, I know how the system works. I'm just living within it. So whatever. So like, how'd you find the body? And she's like, well, there was evidence. And then she looks at the mushrooms. And MaoMao's like, mushrooms. And she's like, the mushrooms in the area are those that like to grow on animal carcasses and excrement. She's like, they grow on bodies and shit. Isn't this the best, Jinshi? Aren't these the coolest? Haven't you ever seen this? She's like, oh, no wonder there was this peculiar rotting smell of death. She's like Wednesday Addams. She's just sitting there like, look at all this amazingly disturbing stuff. She's like, who would have thought I was enjoying mushroom hunting over a corpse? Again, Lohman said, keep the girl away from corpses. It's a gateway drug. We've got to keep her away from this. It's a gateway drug. That's why Jinshi steps in. Because then she looks over being like, did I say too much? Was I weird there? Was I too weird? And Gao Xun's like, I'm not even going to acknowledge this. And Jinshi's like, Jinshi just has such dead eyes. Such dead eyes. And he's like, what are you going to do with the mushrooms? I think that the thing about it is, I don't think Jinshi is particularly like weirded out by her obsession with corpses and mushrooms and dead things. I think what makes him frustrated is that the things she wants to do, like the experiments and all this, are things that hurt her. And he's like, you know, what have we talked about? MaoMao. About let's not be hurting ourselves. He's like, what are you gonna do with the mushrooms? And she's like, oh. And she slowly looks over to them because she knows he's gonna confiscate him. And she's like, oh, these are very super interesting mushrooms. The chibi moments are adorable. I love every second of this. Where he's like, mushrooms? She's like, oh, they're super interesting mushrooms. Jinshi's face when he says, the mushrooms that grow on corpses? Like, just like, oh, the way he looks down on her as he says that. She's like, well, they don't go directly on the corpses, you know, like caterpillar fungus or anything like that, so don't take my mushrooms away. She's like, you know, this is fine. And Jinshi just looks at her like, you know what I'm about to say. You know how I'm about to be. Why would you do this? Besides, if they did, you know, they'd be called corpse fungi instead. And he's like, confiscate them. And she's like, no. And Gao Xun's like, yes, you don't get these mushrooms. And she's like, no. I love it. She's like, it was just innocent curiosity. No, Lohman would be very proud of Jinshi for keeping her away from the corpse mushrooms. Yep. And there's the mushroom from the opening. A mushroom that grows on a corpse. If such a thing existed, what would it look like? And what effects would it have? And it's a blue corpse. Is she saying like, there's such a curiosity there with that final corpse because you could take it in a lot of different directions with it being a blue corpse. So, I mean, is she thinking about her mom in that moment? And like, what kind of mushrooms would her mom grow from that? Like from her body? And is she thinking about herself? Like because MaoMao's had some like intrusive thoughts. Like when she was talking to Jinshi, been like, you're the one that may have to kill me. So poison me, you know. Is she thinking about what kind of mushrooms would her corpse grow? Is she thinking about Suirei and the immortality medicine? Like what that is? Like, you know, would those mushrooms grant immortality? Like it's very open-ended what she's talking about with the mushrooms on a corpse and what they would grow. But our MaoMao is not afraid to be a little bit morbid, but the chibis of her getting the mushrooms taken away are freaking hilarious. Where he just looks at her like, are you kidding me? You're not going to hurt yourself with these mushrooms. Just let her have one, Jinshi. Just let her have one. But yeah, I really enjoyed that this was like a self-contained mystery episode. I'm glad we got this wrapped up. I thought that was really fun. Again, they are drawing us away this episode from the whole Shisui Lowland thing. They are drawing us away from them twins. They were coming in on the envoy. They conveniently did not want us to know about that. So funny that, but this was a good episode. This is a nice follow-up for episode 3, right? which kind of ties into season 1 because the whole Fuyo thing was kind of its own episode, which this is kind of the opposite of the Fuyo episode if you think about it. Fuyo got to go off and be with the man of her dreams, and here Tao ends up dead and involved in a corpse mushroom case. Boo. Anyway, I'm excited to hear your thoughts down below. Also, real quick, Algum over on YouTube was saying that they are doing the shorts, like the little shorts, like the Chibi series, like they did in season 1. I did talk about this in the season 1 shorts reaction, but I would definitely wait until all of them were done for the entire season, like the 24 episodes, and then do the 24 shorts together like I did last season. So I don't want to know about them right now. Please don't comment about them. But I will, hopefully, as long as nobody spoils them, reacts to them whenever the season's completely over. So anyway, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with episode 4 of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye!